Okay, perfect. We are now moving to the pharmacovigilance area. So I will be talking about the specific topic regarding pharmacovigilance, which becomes more and more important for global studies. What is reference safety information? Um, First of all, I will shortly provide some regulations on reference safety information contained in legal requirements in both EU and the US. Then I will describe a definition of the type of reactions which are required to be assessed before we start even talking about different safety information. And then I will focus on this specific document which is called reference safety information, its format, and also its content and updates. As this area in safety assessments is quite challenging, during my presentation, I will be also providing details on possible challenges which every sponsor of clinical trials can meet during preparing the documentation and during assessing adverse events in accordance with regulations. So let's start with a short summary of regulations which gives us basis for using this reference safety information. First of all, we have to be aware that in the US Code of Federal Regulation, this topic is not so well specified. It's much broader and gives more flexibility to the sponsors of clinical trials. It is described in, as you can see, in the proper title of the Code of Federal Regulation, but also the guidance for these assessments is provided in the guidance for industry and investigators from December 2012. From the EU perspective, currently we are still acting in accordance with the directive from 2001. However, we are closing to the time where new regulation 536 from 2014 will be applicable. That is why the requirements which I will be presenting are based mainly on this new regulation. And the guidance is provided for the sponsors in the document called Questions and Answers for Clinical Trial Regulation. I based my presentation on the version from July 2021. However, there is a new draft of this question and answers from September 2021. We also have to be aware that some details for these assessments are also contained in ICH guideline on development safety update report, which was adopted by both the US and EU. So the differences among these requirements cause that it is quite difficult to actually make a decision regarding what should be reportable in the US and what should be reportable in the EU. I am aware that my audience today is from different areas of expertise. However, I wanted to just summarize some basic definitions which will be needed to understand the topic I am covering today. So first of all, we have to define where we are. As you may know, during clinical trials and also during assessment of safety in post-marketing environment, we are collecting data on adverse events and adverse reactions. Adverse events, it's a large area of events which can happen during when a patient is in clinical trial, when the patient is administered any drug. From the perspective of clinical trials, we are talking about the situation when the patient is being administered the investigational medicinal product, and during his treatment, the patient experiences an untoward occurrence of kind of medical nature. This occurrence, this event, may or may not be caused by the investigational medicinal product. If it is suspected to be caused by the medicinal product, we are talking about adverse reactions. If this connection, this relationship cannot be established, we are talking about adverse events. Then we have to assess whether such event was serious or not in accordance with the definition provided in regulations. I won't be now focusing on this definition. However, what I wanted to mention here is that if our event is serious and also at least possibly related with our medicinal product under investigation, we have to be very careful to decide whether this event requires reporting to regulatory authorities, competent authorities in the EU, ethics committees, and investigators. And to decide whether we have a reportable event, what is crucial is to decide whether this serious adverse reaction is expected or not. And here we come to the definition of expected versus unexpected reaction. So the reaction should be assessed as unexpected if, from the US perspective, as you can see on in the first part of this table, the reaction is unexpected if it is not described in the investigator brochure or anywhere in the clinical trial application, like general investigational plan or any other document. However, from the EU perspective, this reaction has to be described in a section called reference safety information. So as you can see, this reference safety information part of the document is only mentioned in the EU regulations. It's not mentioned in the US ones. So from the US perspective, it's enough if our event, our reaction is described anywhere in the IB or even in the general investigational plan. However, from the EU perspective, this reaction has to be described in a well-defined section of the IB called reference safety information, which should be a part of the summary of data and guidance for investigator section of the IB, or which should constitute a separate dedicated section of the IB, again under the name reference safety information. For marketed products, if we are using summary of product characteristics as a source of our data about our product for investigators, this reference safety information is simply a section 4.8 of the summary of product characteristics. So it is very well defined. So we have to consider this localization of this document when we have global studies. One more point regarding expected versus unexpected reactions. Each reaction to be assessed as expected, it has to be listed in this reference safety information, but also its specificity and severity has to be listed. So here you've got certain examples what can be listed in the reference safety information, but if we have reaction which look slightly similar, we are not allowed to handle it as expected because of different specificity or severity. And if you would like to learn more about this topic, this is taken from this Q&A document. Additional thing which should be considered while building information about expected reactions in our investigator brochure or reference safety information is that we should be careful with using a proper definitions, because only the definition expected versus unexpected refers to reactions which should be listed in these documents and which should be our basis for assessing whether we have a reportable or not reportable event. So again, please be careful to differentiate between reactions which can be expected, so listed in the documentation, versus reactions or events which are anticipated in the patient population, or maybe in the due to pharmacological properties of the investigational medicinal product. These anticipated reactions cannot be handled as expected, so still require reporting unless we report them in relation to our investigational medicinal product and add them to our investigator brochure. So just a reminder, as one of the challenge is to be familiar with a proper vocabulary and proper definitions to make sure that we properly describe these reactions in our document. And now I would like to move on to some more requirements from the EU perspective, because as you saw, the US regulator, FDA, just requires to assess whether event is expected or unexpected to decide whether we have serious, suspected, unexpected serious adverse reactions, so require expedited reporting to FDA and other bodies, while in the EU, there are more specific requirements for reference safety information, which will cause additional challenges in case of global studies. So when we have both US and EU countries in our study, we have to be careful how our documentation is prepared and how we are assessing our safety information, our events, in order to decide whether the event is reportable. And it can happen that actually some events will not require reporting in the US, but they will still require reporting in the EU. So from the EU perspective, we have to make sure that our reference safety information as a separate section in the IB is described also in our cover letter, which we attach to our application dossier. So we have to, even if in our cover letter, we have to point out which part of the investigator brochure or summary of product characteristics actually provides information which will be used to decide whether we have a SUSAR or not. This can be a challenge if we are during our study we are using marketed products and our reference safety information is actually contained in the summary of product characteristics, because in this case scenario, if we have several summaries of product characteristics in different countries, we have to decide on one, which is the best to point out as our reference safety information. So this is very important to be considered from the perspective of the indication we are investigating and countries in which we are conducting our study. Then the EU requirements provide detailed guidance how our reference safety information should look like. So it says that the format of reference safety information should be a table which provides the event terms for our reactions. These terms should be provided in accordance with the latest version of Medical Dictionary for Regulatory Activities, so MEDRA. So we cannot use, any given term we want. We have to use only approved MEDRA terms to present in our table. And also, we have to provide the frequency of appearance of our reactions. So we have to determine how often this reaction was reported during our trial. It is recommended to use these frequencies in accordance again with MEDRA SOC terms. The same frequency categories which are used for the purpose of preparing summaries of products characteristics information. However, if we do not have enough details, enough reactions to use this frequency, it is allowed to use exact numbers. So provide how many times in our trial or in our trials a given reaction appeared. This is important to know because we currently experience more and more situations in which competent authorities actually have comments or questions or even reject documentation which is not provided in this way. Another thing to consider is a situation when we actually have our investigational medicinal product administered in different indications, because it may happen that we actually need more than one table with events. It can happen, for example, that depending on indication, we notice different types of events. The same if we use our product in different populations. For example, in pediatric population, we may see different events than in adult population. And again, this should be considered as early as possible during our trial, because it may happen that if during the study we decide to add an indication or add a population, for example, pediatric population, we will have to update our reference safety information and make other essential changes to our documentation. And what about the situation when this is, let's say, our first study and we simply do not have any events to be mentioned in the reference safety information? We cannot simply do not provide. We can provide this section. This section has to be provided in the IB always from the EU perspective. So what we should do is simply prepare a section called reference safety information and mention that no serious adverse reactions were reported so far for our product. The lack of this section put us at risk that our application will be rejected in the EU. It can happen during the study that actually we decided that we should update our reference safety information. It is possible to be done, but there are certain situations which we should consider, and there are certain timelines in which this update may take place. So first of all, we should be aware that if a given reaction occurred, and at the time of its occurrence, this reaction was not in our reference safety information, this reaction is unexpected and will remain unexpected. So For the purpose of assessment of each reaction, we should be using currently approved reference safety information. So if a given reaction is not described in currently approved reference safety information, this reaction should be handled as unexpected. Even if in the future we add this reaction to reference safety information, we should not reassess our events retrospectively. Even if we receive some follow-up information for our event, and at the time of the follow-up receipt, we have new reference safety information which says that this event should be expected, well, again, we are not allowed to downgrade this event and say that it is now expected, because the event was unexpected at the time it occurred. So this is very important, because this is, again, a very frequent finding during any audits or inspections, that sponsors simply reassess events and downgrade users, which is not a good practice. When we decide to add an event to the reference safety information, we should be aware that we have to submit it as a substantial amendment to our application, and also that we should provide a risk minimization measures for this event, and also update our benefit risk statement for our product. If we decide to make this update, we cannot do this whenever we want. We should align it with our periodic reporting. So it is recommended that the updated version of the reference safety information should be submitted in the IB investigator brochure, which is added to our the development safety update report or other type of annual safety report. And we should coordinate the submission of this investigator brochure with the annual safety report, or submit the updated brochure not later than 1 month after the annual safety report is submitted. So again, here is a challenge, how to coordinate it if we have many countries, if we have different time for approval of the IB across EU. And in the US, for example, it is even not required to have the IB approved by FDA. So we may end up in the situation that actually our updated IB is approved in some, but not in all countries. And then the decision has to be made which version of our IB should be used for our current assessment of events. So again, the conscious decision should be made which version to choose. What is more, currently, according to the directive from 2001, in EU, we should wait for approval from all EU countries before we actually start using our new reference safety information. So it can be that our document is already approved in, let's say, 2 out of 5 countries, and we have an event and we try to figure out in accordance with which document it should be assessed. We should actually assess it in accordance with the version which is approved in all countries. So again, we have a challenge in actually, what to do for these countries in which this IB was already approved. Happily, the regulators found a solution, and in the new regulation, it will be simpler, because it will be enough that our updated investigator brochure is approved by the first member state, the first EU country concerned. So if only it is approved in one country, we can apply it across our studies, our countries in our study in the EU. However, again, it can happen that EU member states will have some additional local requirements. So it may happen that we'll actually have to meet some additional requirements. I started to discuss how to align reference safety information updates with the annual safety reporting. There are some more tips which I would like to raise here for your awareness. I mentioned that for the purpose of assessing events which we present in our annual safety report or development safety update report, we should be using the reference safety information which is approved at the beginning of the reporting period. So at the beginning of the time period which we cover in our periodic report. Even if we decide that changes are needed to our reference safety information and that we will be submitting changes to the IB together with our annual safety report, we should still use the currently approved, not the new one, but the currently approved reference safety information for the purpose of our assessment. And here you've got an interesting scenario, what actually should be done because these time periods may actually overlap. So, for example, if our data log point for our annual report is, as you can see, 15 July 2020, and we are submitting our annual safety report on the 10th of September, together with our updated IB, we still have to use the IB version 1 for the purpose of SUSAR assessment until our IB version 2 is approved. So let's imagine that this is approved on the 15th of October. However, for our annual report next year, we have an issue because at the beginning of our reporting period, so let's say 15 July 2021, at the beginning of this period, so in 2020, we still had this IB version 2, while now we have our IB version in the 2020 we had the IB version 1, while in the 2021 we have already version 2. So there is a period of a month or maybe even longer where actually we are not sure which IB should be used. But again, it is recommended to be consistent. So probably what should be done, we should be using the IB version 2 consistently across our whole period. However, again, it may be circumstances in which we'll decide to provide certain reactions in accordance, which happened at the time our version 1 was approved, in accordance with this version, and the rest in accordance with version 2. So there are several scenarios possible. However, the guidance says that, and we should try to stick to it, that the IB which should be used is the IB which is effective at the beginning of our reporting period. So summing up, while deciding what to report, what are our expedited reports, we have to be aware of the definition of unexpected reaction and the fact that this definition is different in the US than in the EU. And for EU studies or global studies, we have to be aware of the additional requirements for the reference safety information provided in the EU guidance. And the consideration should be given where actually to start using the new version of the IP. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Ms. Eva, for your presentation. It was so interesting, but unfortunately, we are running short of time, so we're gonna skip the Q&A session. And if you kindly give us your email, so anyone has any question can contact you via email.
Yes,
Please.
of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation and everything. Thank you.